We finally got it. Laurel and Hardy, The Restored Features Volume 1. Pardon us and pack up your troubles, fully remastered, restored, and with bonus features. I'd love to dig into this today, but I think we have another ranking video to do. So this will be coming at a later date. Please comment some of your favorite Laurel and Hardy movies below, and let's take a look at the next step in my ranking, shall we? 1941 gave us so many film classics. There are the obvious ones, of course. Citizen Kane, How Green Was My Valley, The Maltese Falcon, Sergeant York, Suspicion, and there were a few other things that ran away at the box office that year. Bob Hope had several big hit comedies. The very underrated Clark Gable and Lana Turner vehicle Honky Tonk. And of course, this new comedy duo that had just recently moved from radio to motion pictures, Abbott and Costello, stealing the show with their technical sort of starring feature debut, Buck Privates. They'd been in one film previously as supporting players, but Buck Privates is very much a Bud and Lou vehicle. And Buck Privates resonated quite a bit with audiences in 1941 and proved to be a very effective recruiting tool for the U.S. Army. Now, Buck Privates, of course, Bud and Lou are on top form. They have tons of great routines. Lou gets a great song, about when he becomes a captain, that sort of thing. The Andrews Sisters steal the show with Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and I'll Be With You in Apple Blossom Time, things like that. But Buck Privates, like a lot of World War II era films, is about as subtle as being shot in the face with a bazooka. I mean, it's very obvious that we're supposed to want to go out and enlist in the army or something similar immediately after watching it. It's also saddled with a really dull and unengaging romantic subplot between the male and female juvenile leads that just, Bud and Lou have nothing to do with, and it comes off as pretty tired. And I think has aged Buck Privates even more than the World War II propaganda does. But Buck Privates really struck a chord when it was released in January of 1941. I say that because now we come to the next Laurel and Hardy film on our ranking, also from 1941, but later in the year, their first of 6 films for Fox, and my pick for the best one, 1941's Great Guns. Great Guns is one of the first Laurel and Hardy films I saw, not the first, but I'll always have a special spot for it. It was definitely the first of their 6 Fox films that I saw first. Laurel and Hardy are caretakers, and their, boss, Dick Nelson, plays this young invalid. His doctor, played by great character actor Ludwig Stoessel, reminds him, "Oh, you cannot go out and join the army, that would not be any good," that sort of thing. And of course, when he gets his draft notice, he's elated. Stan and Ollie, his elderly aunts, played wonderfully by Ethel Griffiths and Mae Marsh, try to talk him out of it, saying, no, you're too weak to join the army, that sort of thing. But Dick Nelson's character is determined, and indeed he does join the army, and Stan and Ollie go with him to help. It's a pretty basic setup, there's not a lot going on. Indeed, Great Guns is 73 minutes, so we're not going to get a ton of deep character development or anything like that. But I do think Stan and Ollie do pretty well. Now, apparently Great Guns' production was a bit strained because Stan and Laurel in particular was very used to having, say in things behind the scenes, directing choices, writing choices, editing choices, that sort of thing. Fox vetoed all of those, claiming you are an actor, you are here to act, someone else will take care of all that. But I think director Montague Banks does a pretty good job of setting things up. He seems to have that light touch that's kind of necessary. Great Guns borrows a lot of its marching orders, literally, from Buck Privates. The finale especially, involving like a war game scenario, is lifted, I think, maybe it's close enough to constitute plagiarism from Buck Privates, but Great Guns still has its own kind of fun personality to it. Stan and Ollie get, as usual, most of the best gags, that kind of thing. Particularly Stanley, I think, gets some really good bits too. One where Sergeant Hippo, played by Edmund McDonald, our main antagonist of the film, his pipe blows up in his face, prompting Stanley to say the very politically incorrect but still amusing statement when he sees the sergeant with soot all over his face, "Look, Ollie, they've sent us a porter." That sort of thing. Reminds me of some of the gags he would do in movies like Pardon Us, which came much earlier. There's some good stuff involving Penelope, Stanley's pet raven, including they try to hide Penelope at one point inside their uniforms and so on. Some good gags there. Nothing that's going to make you bust a gut laughing. But at the end of the day, Great Guns is consistently amusing. And Ollie has some good bits too. They'll probably put me in the intelligence corps. And a scene where they stow away on like a target vehicle and almost get shot with machine guns. Definitely some good gags, and they redo some of their silent era comedy involving gigantic boards, that sort of thing. And there's some good bits in here. I like Dick Nelson. I think he has good chemistry with Stan and Ollie. And I like Edmund McDonald as the antagonistic Sergeant Hippo. He doesn't get a ton to do. Again, you can tell they looked at Buck Privates and kind of condensed it and smoothed it down. Cut out the musical numbers. Trimmed back on the romantic subplot, that sort of thing. The very beautiful and talented Sheila Ryan pops up. We talked about her when I reviewed A Haunting We Will Go as well. Great Guns isn't going to be anybody's favorite, but I think at the end of the day, it's a strong start to their work with Fox. And while it's not going to be, a Laurel and Hardy classic, it is very enjoyable. I think if you're willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, there's some good laughs in here. It's not as in-your-face propaganda as other movies of the time were. And it's just kind of an amusing, fun B picture, that sort of thing. And let's move kind of up a tier and look at Laurel and Hardy films that are even more fun, shall we? And ones that maybe could even be considered minor classics. And now we shift gears from World War II to World War I. Great Guns is consistently amusing, but not really a classic. But here might be the first true classic on our list, Laurel and Hardy's 1938 featurette, Blockheads. I say featurette because Blockheads comes in at less than an hour. It's about 58 minutes or so, and it makes for a weird experience because it feels like a long, short film. And this might be the reason why I put Blockheads here on the list instead of a little bit higher, because I used to really love Blockheads as a kid, getting into Laurel and Hardy, but it's one that doesn't hold up for me on repeat viewings. Mostly because a lot of the ideas the group had already done. Some of the concepts date back to the silent and early sound days of Laurel and Hardy's films. They borrow a lot from We Fall Down, and especially from Unaccustomed as We Are. In this case involving a woman having to hide and change her clothes while her jealous husband's outside. She was visiting Stan and Ollie and an innocent accident resulted in the necessary change of clothes. And so the hijinks that evolved from that. Almost everything is ripped directly from Unaccustomed as We Are for Blockheads in that regard, the whole final act of the film. And that to me, to be rehashing all these old ideas doesn't work as well for me, especially as I became more and more familiar with their silent work and kind of the earlier films that this had called from. But that being said, Blockheads does still have its own unique identity despite borrowing so much from previous films. Indeed, The Beginning, which I guess is actually based loosely on a Harry Langdon comedy, Harry Langdon does get a co-writing credit, depicts Stan and Ollie in the trenches of World War I back in 1918. Stanley's asked to stay behind and guard the trench while the rest of the unit moves forward, and indeed he stays in that position until 1938, having never been relieved. And only when he accidentally shoots down a Frenchman flying by does he actually realize the war has been over for quite some time. And there are some funny visual gags, Stanley wearing the trench deeper and deeper, the many, many thousands of cans of beans that he's eaten and discarded, that sort of thing, and Ollie's reaction to seeing a picture in the newspaper, which Three Stooges supporting actor James C. Morton gives to him, and Ollie's saying, "Oh, I can't imagine anyone so ridiculous," and looking at the picture of Stan and saying, "Oh, yes, I can." And naturally, he wants to visit Stan at the veterans' home and eventually bring him home to Mrs. Hardy for him to meet and have a nice steak dinner. And everything just goes downhill from there. Some good gags involving Stanley wrecking Oliver's car. The garage door is opened by a panel embedded in the ground, which of course Stanley misses and crashes into the garage instead. There's some hijinks there involving, the kitchen catching on fire and so on. Things that we've seen Laurel and Hardy do before, or at least similar gags before. They're still pretty funny, but again, I wish Blockheads had gone maybe in a more original direction, because when we get to that last act, that's when we dig out the gags from We Fall Down and Unaccustomed as We Are, those late silent, early sound films, and just kind of repeat all of those. But still, certainly very watchable. James Finlayson is a fun cameo, challenging Ollie to a duel. And Stanley's repeated line, "There's going to be a fight. There's going to be a fight," telling everybody and dragging the whole building down, or I should say everyone in the building down with him to watch this supposed bloodbath that's about to occur. Tommy Bond from Little Rascals is a fun part as a boy who keeps kicking a football and hitting Ollie, and Stanley takes care of his father with one punch, which is pretty funny too. Some good stuff, just again, not original enough. Blockheads apparently was going to be, at one point anyway, the last Laurel and Hardy film. There were some contract disputes with Hal Roach and so on. That explains why we get things like Zenobia in 1939, Oliver Hardy's solo film that ironically teamed him with Harry Langdon, one of the writers for this. And apparently Harry Langdon had taken some gags from his film Soldier Man and reused them for the beginning. I've never seen Soldier Man though, so I can't attest to that personally. But a fun featurette, you know, it could have definitely been longer. Billy Gilbert especially for his role as the bombastic, jealous husband, you know, Ollie's neighbor, that sort of thing. I wish he really had more to do. Apparently it was going to end with him shooting Stan and Ollie and mounting their heads on the wall, and Ollie's head would turn to Stanley's and say, "Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten me into," which that would have been an amazing gag, and that probably would have bumped this up a couple pegs for me, because they didn't really do anything else like that. At least not directly like that anyway. But, you know, good ideas, but tired ones, I think. But Blockheads, still definitely worth a watch. Let's take a look at another war comedy now, a completely different one to boot. Well, I should say different in terms of geography and the conflict that is the center of the story. Because next on our list we have The Flying Deuces from 1939. Stan and Ollie join the French Foreign Legion. Now, like Blockheads, this one borrows a lot from earlier films, specifically a short film the group did in 1931 called Bohunks. Bohunks runs about 40 minutes, about 37 as a matter of fact. Bohunks tells the story of Stan and Ollie joining the French Foreign Legion so Ollie can forget all about the love of his life, Jeannie Weenie, depicted by Jean Harlow in various photographs. And of course they soon find that every single man in the French Foreign Legion, including the commander and the rebel chieftain that they're fighting, have all been dumped by Jeannie Weenie, and that's why they're all going to war. Bohunks is a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. It falls into that weird kind of featurette category, like Blockheads, and like the shortened version of Chump at Oxford I talked about in one of these previous videos. Those all kind of fit there. Not quite a short film, but not quite a feature film either. Kind of in the middle. But Bohunks, one of Hal Roach's favorites, and one that I always enjoy coming back to. And so when Laurel and Hardy were in the midst of their contract dispute, they ended up making a film for producer Boris Moros and RKO, and that film became The Flying Deuces. You might notice how odd this DVD artwork looks, because it's part of a public domain collection, and indeed The Flying Deuces is in the public domain. So many people have seen it or own copies of it. Lots of very low quality copies circulate online, that sort of thing. But The Flying Deuces does have a lot to recommend it. So it kind of changes the story a little bit. Oliver's in love with the beautiful Georgette, but Georgette, unbeknownst to Ollie, is already married, that sort of thing. She's just kind of being nice to him out of politeness. And when Ollie finds that, you know, Georgette is unobtainable, he wants to drown himself. This scene doesn't work too well for some Laurel and Hardy fans, but I do think it's kind of funny. And ultimately, of course, they're saved unknowingly by her husband, who insists they join the French Foreign Legion, and this way they can forget about Georgette. They can focus on marching and drilling and, you know, fighting rebels where accurate, that sort of thing. And I like that a lot. Indeed, Charles Middleton reprises his role as the commanding officer. He's not quite as good here as he is in Bohunks, but he does have some funny scenes. Stan and Ollie bicker with him about how much they're paid. "We don't work for less than 25 cents a day." That sort of thing. But definitely a lot of fun. A few other Stan and Ollie regulars pop up, despite this being an RKO film and not a Hal Roach one. James Finlayson appears very briefly as the jailer. He has a couple fun scenes, not a whole lot, but a few amusing ones. Richard Kramer and Arthur Hausman pop up, and some good character actors too. particularly in scenes where Stan and Ollie are using wine bottles to fight off Legionnaires, that sort of thing, because pretty soon Stan and Ollie want to leave the Legion, but you can't just walk out, of course, because it is indeed a military base, all that. So, which results in, I think, the Flying Deuces' kind of weakest part. There is an extended chase at the end involving Stan and Ollie escaping the base and stealing an airplane, and it's a series of sight gags, but it goes on for way too long. And this strange ending where Oliver dies and comes back as a horse being reincarnated, I know, again, doesn't sit well with some Laurel and Hardy fans. I think it's kind of funny, but I get why some people might not like it too much. Although Laurel and Hardy occasionally did kind of dark humor, this one might be a little bit too dark. I totally get it. So The Flying Deuces is certainly, like Blockheads, very serviceable, very amusing. Not the best work, but I think it's a good one for beginners, and being in the public domain, you know, you can access it very easily, that kind of thing. I know Leonard Maltin said it worked well because it has kind of a faster pace, and there is some truth to that, but there is a break taken for musical numbers, something that Blockheads did not have. We have my second favorite Laurel and Hardy musical number with Ollie's performance of Shine On Harvest Moon while Stanley dances. It's really nice. Oliver has a beautiful voice. We still haven't come to my favorite Laurel and Hardy musical number yet, but we will probably in the next ranking video. And Stanley gets a weird chance to even play the harp. Now, of course, it's dubbed in, but he picks up his mattress and strums that kind of thing on like the bed springs. It's a really fun bit, and he plays The World Is Waiting for Sunrise. A very good gag. Kind of feels like almost it's from a different movie, but it does work. So The Flying Deuces, like Blockheads and Great Guns, very amusing, not a classic, not a must-see, but one that if you watch it, I think you'll have a good time with it. So I think we've kind of reached the section of the Laurel and Hardy ranking where these are films that are good, but maybe they're not the 5-star, you know, great titles. But next time we'll get into a few that I think are truly great movies. I do hope you'll tune in for that. Please comment your favorite Laurel and Hardy films below, or your thoughts on my ranking of them. I hope to see you next time. Until then, don't get in any other fine messes.